What's more dangerous than an outlaw? A lawman who becomes one. Imagine trusting your life to a sheriff, only to discover he's the mastermind behind the very crimes terrorizing your town. In the American frontier, some of the most feared bandits weren't just breaking the law, they were sworn to protect it. Today, we uncover the shocking true stories of men who wore the badge by day and the mask by night. Men whose names were whispered in fear by both citizens and criminals alike. This isn't just another Wild West story. This is the dark truth about how some of America's most trusted lawmen became its most dangerous outlaws. So, let's begin. The American frontier was a land where the line between hero and villain was often drawn in shifting sand. In an era when a man's worth was measured by the speed of his draw and the strength of his conviction, some of the West's most legendary lawmen found themselves crossing that very line they'd sworn to defend. Picture a tin star gleaming in the desert sun. Now imagine that same badge, tarnished and discarded, as its bearer trades his lawman's oath for an outlaw's greed. This isn't fiction, friends. This is the untold story of the Wild West's most fascinating paradox. Respected peacekeepers who became the very thing they once hunted. These weren't simple cases of good men gone bad. No, their stories paint a more complex picture of human nature itself. Men like Henry Plummer, who walked the streets of Bannock, Montana, as its sheriff while secretly orchestrating a reign of terror as the leader of a ruthless road agent gang. Or William Bear River Smith, whose name once struck fear into the hearts of criminals, only to become whispered in horror by honest citizens. But what drives a man to make such a dramatic transformation? How does someone entrusted with upholding the law become its most notorious enemy? The answer lies in the very nature of the frontier itself, a lawless expanse where power corrupted and opportunity beckoned like a siren's song. In the next hour, we'll peel back the layers of these fascinating lives, examining the circumstances that led these men down their dark paths. We'll explore how the same skills that made them exceptional lawmen, quick thinking, commanding presence, and deadly accuracy with a gun, served them equally well in their criminal endeavors. These aren't just stories of fallen heroes, they're cautionary tales about the seductive nature of power and the thin line between justice and vengeance. So, saddle up, because we're about to journey into one of the most compelling chapters of Wild West history, where the heroes and villains sometimes wore the same face, and a man's true character was as mysterious as the frontier itself. In the untamed territories of the American West, the path from lawman to outlaw wasn't a sudden leap. It was a gradual descent paved with temptation, opportunity, and the harsh realities of frontier life. The 1860s and 70s saw a peculiar phenomenon. Men of the law discovering that their badge could serve as the perfect cover for criminal enterprise. The position of sheriff or marshal in a frontier town came with more than just authority. It came with inside knowledge. These men knew every gold shipment schedule, every wealthy merchant's routine, and every gap in security. More importantly, they held the trust of the very communities they would later exploit. But what pushed them to betray that trust? The answer lies partly in the economics of law enforcement in the Old West. A lawman's salary was meager, typically no more than $150 a month, while a single successful stagecoach robbery could net thousands in gold. Many peacekeepers lived side by side with the incredible wealth of the mining boom, watching others strike it rich while they struggled to make ends meet on a public servant's pay. Then there was the matter of power itself. In isolated frontier towns, a sheriff's word was often the only law for hundreds of miles. This unchecked authority, combined with the widespread corruption of the era, created perfect conditions for abuse. Some lawmen started small, accepting bribes to look the other way, partnering with criminals for a cut of their takes, or using their badge to extort protection money. The very skills that made them effective lawmen served them well in their criminal ventures. They knew how Pazzi thought, understood the limitations of frontier communication, and could anticipate law enforcement responses. Their reputation as peacekeepers often placed them above suspicion, allowing them to operate in plain sight while building their criminal enterprises. Perhaps most crucially, these men had seen firsthand how thin the line between survival and lawlessness could be in the West. They'd witnessed wealthy criminals go unpunished while poor, honest men hung, and many began to view their badge as simply another tool for getting ahead in a ruthless world. In the blood-soaked annals of the American West, Few names evoke such a complex mixture of respect and revulsion as Henry Plummer. In 1863, the citizens of Bannock, Montana, elected him as their sheriff, believing they had found their guardian angel. Little did they know, they had just handed their town's keys to the devil himself. Plummer arrived in Bannock with an air of sophistication that set him apart from the rough-hewn miners and drifters. Tall, well-spoken, and disarmingly charming, he cut a striking figure in his black broadcloth suit. His reputation as a capable lawman in Nevada preceded him, and his seemingly genuine desire to bring order to the chaos of the gold rush territory won over even the most skeptical settlers. But beneath this carefully crafted image lurked a criminal mastermind. While wearing the sheriff's badge by day, Plummer secretly led the notorious Innocence Gang, a ruthless band of road agents responsible for over 100 murders and countless robberies along the Virginia City-Bannock Road. His position as sheriff provided the perfect cover, allowing him to gather intelligence on gold shipments, misdirect posses, and even order his deputies to investigate crimes his own gang had committed. The brilliance of Plummer's scheme lay in its simplicity. Who would suspect the respected sheriff, the man who consoled grieving widows of his victims and organized searches for stolen gold that he himself had hidden? His gang operated with surgical precision, using a complex system of signals and informants, many of whom were respected members of the community. When travelers reported robberies, Plummer would listen sympathetically, all while mentally calculating his share of their lost gold. But like many criminal empires, Plummer's reign had an Achilles heel. Success bred carelessness. As the body count rose and robberies became more frequent, suspicious patterns emerged. The road agents seemed to have uncanny knowledge of which shipments carried the most gold, and their victims had a peculiar habit of dying before they could identify their attackers. The story of William Bear River Smith stands as one of the most dramatic falls from grace in frontier history. In 1868, the bustling railroad town of Bear River City, Wyoming, knew him as the epitome of frontier justice, a marshal whose very name made hardened criminals tremble. But within months, this paragon of law enforcement would become something far more sinister. Smith earned his fearsome reputation honestly enough. Standing 6 feet tall with shoulders like a grizzly, he brought order to Bear River City through sheer force of will and lightning-fast gun work. In his first month as marshal, he famously faced down 6 armed railroad workers single-handedly, killing 2 and sending the rest fleeing into the Wyoming wilderness. The incident earned him both his nickname and an aura of invincibility that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But power, as it often does, began to corrupt. What started as aggressive law enforcement slowly morphed into something darker. Smith began employing increasingly violent methods, crossing lines that even frontier justice couldn't justify. He developed a habit of shooting first and asking questions later, and his definition of criminal behavior became suspiciously flexible, especially when dealing with wealthy railroad contractors who opposed his methods. The turning point came when Smith formed his own band of deputies, men who shared his increasingly violent vision of justice. These weren't peace officers in any traditional sense, but rather a private army that answered only to Smith. They began extracting protection money from businesses, orchestrating their own robberies, and eliminating anyone who dared to question their authority. Most chilling was Smith's transformation from protector to predator. The same skills that had made him an effective marshal, his intimidating presence, his quick draw, his network of informants, now served a far darker purpose. He used his badge not as a symbol of justice, but as a shield for extortion, theft, and what many would later call outright terrorism against the very community he'd sworn to protect. Of all the Wild West's chameleon-like characters, few shifted between lawman and outlaw with the fluid grace of Ben Thompson. A man who could quote Shakespeare one moment and gun down an opponent the next, Thompson embodied the complexity of frontier justice in ways that still puzzle historians today. Born in England but Texas-raised, Thompson built his early reputation as one of the deadliest gunfighters in the Southwest. His skill with a pistol wasn't just legend, it was mathematics. He approached gunfighting with an almost scientific precision, practicing until he could hit a playing card edge-on at 15 paces. This lethal accuracy, combined with his quick wit and dapper appearance, made him an unlikely but effective choice for Austin City Marshal in 1881. Initially, Thompson seemed to be the perfect fusion of gentleman and gunfighter. He cleaned up Austin's streets with remarkable efficiency, and his reputation alone was often enough to prevent violence. Criminals would rather flee than face the man whom even Wild Bill Hickok had praised as the quickest shot in Texas. But beneath this successful facade, Thompson was playing a dangerous double game. While wearing the marshal's badge, he maintained close connections with the gambling houses and brothels he was supposed to regulate. He would enforce the law strictly against some establishments while turning a blind eye to others, those who paid him well for his selective enforcement. His personal vendettas became police matters, and his friends' crimes mysteriously went uninvestigated. The line between law enforcement and criminal behavior became increasingly blurred as Thompson used his authority to settle personal scores. He would arrest rivals on trumped-up charges, only to release them after their businesses suffered. His reports of resisting arrest suspiciously often ended with his opponents in the cemetery, and witnesses to these incidents had a habit of becoming suddenly forgetful when questioned. Perhaps most telling was Thompson's ability to switch roles at will. He could be the stern enforcer of the law in Austin, then ride to San Antonio or Fort Worth to participate in gambling schemes and protection rackets, always staying just on the right side of legally defensible. William Bill Tilghman, the tarnished legend. For decades, Bill Tilghman stood as the quintessential frontier lawman, his reputation seemingly as pure as the silver star he wore. History books painted him as the incorruptible marshal who helped tame Oklahoma Territory, serving alongside legends like Bat Masterson and Chris Madsen. But, as with many Wild West legends, the truth carried darker shades that only emerged in the twilight of his career. Tilghman's early career seemed to embody everything noble about frontier law enforcement. During his tenure as Marshal of Dodge City, he earned fame for making arrests without firing a shot, preferring cunning over violence. His methodical approach to law enforcement and unwavering dedication to justice made him a living legend. Even outlaws spoke of him with a mixture of fear and respect, knowing that once Tilghman took your trail, capture was all but certain. But the dawn of the 20th century brought changes that Tilghman struggled to navigate. As Oklahoma transformed from territory to state, the nature of law enforcement changed. The old ways of frontier justice clashed with modern policing methods, and Tilghman found himself increasingly out of step with the times. It was during this period that the first cracks in his pristine image began to appear. Reports surfaced of Tilghman accepting bribes from bootleggers during Prohibition, using his reputation as a shield while he profited from the very crimes he was supposed to prevent. Some witnesses claimed he ran his own protection racket, demanding payments from illegal establishments in exchange for turning a blind eye to their operations. The very qualities that had made him an effective lawman, his independence, his reliance on personal judgment over written law, now cast shadows over his legacy. Most disturbing were the allegations that emerged about his final years as a Prohibition officer. Former colleagues whispered about evidence tampering, suspicious disappearances, and instances of excessive force that went far beyond the bounds of necessary law enforcement. The man who had once prided himself on bloodless arrests now seemed quicker to reach for his gun than his handcuffs. The psychology of the double life. What transforms a protector into a predator? The psychological journey from lawman to outlaw reveals a fascinating study in human nature, power, and the corrosive effect of unchecked authority. The Wild West created unique conditions where the guardians of justice could gradually become its greatest threats, often without even recognizing their own transformation. The process typically began with small compromises. A bribe accepted here, a blind eye turned there. These men often rationalized their early misdeeds as necessary evils in a harsh land where justice sometimes needed to operate in shades of gray. The badge became not just a symbol of authority, but a shield behind which darker impulses could safely hide. Each unpunished transgression made the next one easier, creating a slow but steady erosion of moral boundaries. Power played a crucial role in this transformation. In frontier towns, a lawman's authority was nearly absolute, with little oversight and fewer checks and balances. This combination of power and isolation created what psychologists today might call corruption of authority syndrome. The very men trusted to enforce limits found themselves operating in a world essentially without limits, leading to a distorted sense of right and wrong. Many of these lawmen turned outlaws displayed classic signs of what we now recognize as compartmentalization, the ability to separate their legal and illegal activities into distinct mental categories. This psychological mechanism allowed them to maintain their public image as respected peacekeepers while simultaneously orchestrating criminal enterprises. They didn't see themselves as criminals, but as pragmatists playing both sides of an unfair system. The frontier environment itself contributed to this duality. In a world where survival often trumped morality, these men had witnessed countless examples of justice failing while crime prospered. Their transition from law enforcer to lawbreaker often came with a cynical revelation that the law was simply another tool for personal advancement, no different from a gun or a badge. Their intimate knowledge of law enforcement's limitations became a roadmap for exploitation, legacy, and modern perspective. The stories of these lawmen turned outlaws didn't end with their deaths. If anything, their legacies have grown more complex with time. Today, their tales serve as more than just thrilling chapters in Wild West history. They offer profound insights into human nature, power, and the eternal struggle between duty and temptation. Modern law enforcement has drawn crucial lessons from these historical figures. The spectacular falls from grace of men like Plummer and Thompson led to the development of more robust systems of accountability in police forces. The badge is no longer a shield from scrutiny, but rather a symbol that demands even greater transparency. Modern departments now employ internal affairs divisions, body cameras, and civilian oversight boards, all institutional responses to the hard lessons learned from these frontier cautionary tales. Yet, these men remain fascinating paradoxes in American folklore. Hollywood and popular culture have often romanticized their stories, turning complex moral failures into entertaining tales of anti-heroes. This sanitized version of history does a disservice to the real lessons their lives can teach us. The truth is both more disturbing and more instructive. These weren't simple cases of good men going bad, but rather a demonstration of how power, opportunity, and lack of accountability can corrupt even the most respected pillars of law and order. Perhaps the most relevant legacy of these double-lived lawmen is the reminder that the line between protector and predator remains razor-thin. Even in our modern era, we continue to see examples of authority figures who succumbed to the same temptations that turned frontier marshals into outlaws. The core elements, power, opportunity, and the ability to hide behind a badge haven't changed, even if the settings have. As we close this chapter of Wild West history, we're left with a sobering reminder. The greatest threat to justice isn't always the obvious outlaw, but the trusted guardian who crosses that invisible line. In the end, these men's stories served not just as historical curiosities, but as eternal warnings about the seductive nature of power and the constant vigilance required to maintain the integrity of law enforcement.